Dear students, welcome to another lecture in our series on research methods. This time we will look into controlled experiments and, to be more precisely, into controlled experiments with human subjects. We will have another iteration with controlled experiments of technology artifacts. These are rather different because the characteristics are also a bit different. So this time it's about human subjects, and the point is not that we just want to experiment with humans. That's not too interesting in its own right, but if we want to discuss impact of technologies, impact of methods or such, these are always about the impact on humans, and that's where controlled experimentation with human subjects come in. If we want to confirm or disconfirm something, some expectation we have in that area, we have to resort to such a controlled experiment or one of the related methods. The outline of this lecture is as follows. First, I will discuss a bit the boundaries of the approach. Then I will go a bit deeper into what controlled human experiments are, or as we call them, controlled experiments with human subjects. Then the major part of the lecture will be on the planning and execution of such controlled experiments, where we also will discuss a longer example as we go. But first, let's start with the boundaries and the overall characteristics of such controlled experiments. We can place controlled experimentation along a number of dimensions. For example, is a controlled experiment a realistic, a natural situation, or do we gather data about something which is inherently artificial? And as you see, controlled experimentations is more on the artificial side. As soon as we start an experiment, we create an artificial setting, and all the data we are going to gather will have the constraint that it tells us something about this artificial situation and not necessarily about a natural setting. This is a restriction, but still the basic data can be rather useful. But it's simply a threat to external validity, as we will discuss later. Then there's a question, can someone or we ourselves replicate such an experiment? And the answer is yes, by and large, controlled experiments, especially ones with human subjects, are rather well replicable. However, as we will see, there's a lot of human aspects in there as well, and also some of the aspects of the settings will be opportunistic, so we cannot achieve full replicability. Like, for example, in a technical setting, there we can go typically much further. How formal are such experiments? And here we have a clearly empirical method. It's really something that tries to gather data from, tries to gather empirical evidence from observations. It's not about a formal approach like we had when we discussed our formal methods. And what are we gathering information about? And that's actually about people. We may get results about the impact of technology on people, but it's ultimately people are in the focus. That's when we are interested in controlled experiments as a research method. So when do we effectively use controlled experiments with human subjects? Basically, the big advantage of controlled experimentation is it provides us with rather reliable feedback, and especially in the sense of internal validity of the results. So whenever we have a research questions relating to people, then it is actually a pretty good method to use, if it's possible from the context. And that also leads us to some restrictions on the applicability. So, for example, there are often contexts which do not allow experimentation, or the effort that is needed is prohibitive, or we need specific situations that cannot be created in experiments, and so on. So these are constraints. But if I have any research questions which relate to people, that can be developers, that can be business people, that can be users, whatever, then it is at least worth to think about the question whether it's possible to do a controlled experiment. Because in terms of internal validity, controlled experiments are about the best you can get. So whenever we are interested in the effect of something on people, or of characteristics of people, like productivity, like amounts of errors made, or creativity, these kind of things, they are all possible contexts for doing controlled experiments. We will discuss in a later lecture the technical experimentation, and the main difference there is that this is about controlled experiments on artifacts. So they are controlled as well, but because this is artifact oriented, also a lot of different concerns apply. Such artifacts can be computers, can be programs, can be many kind of things, but it's technical. So for example, what is the performance of a computer system? That's subject to a technical experiment. So as a result, the main difference between the two types of experimentations that we will discuss in this lecture is really about the subject. Whether it's about some properties of methods or techniques applied to humans. And that also holds if there are technology artifacts in the game or part of the equation. Then still, if it's about properties that are related to humans, then we are talking about controlled experiments with human subjects. As soon as we deal with humans, however, we require certain techniques to handle individual differences, like the individual background, learning effects. Like I cannot restart a human subject as I can restart a computer program, and while the computer program has in the second iteration just the same characteristics as in the first, that's absolutely not true for a human. Or if it drags on too long, there are exhaustion effects and so on. All of that has to be taken into account if we deal with controlled experiments with human subjects. There are actually quite a number of different types of experimentation and of studies with people. And you see some of those in this picture, which is by no means complete. And the main characteristic I would like to show you here is that human experimentation is has a pretty strong effect on work as opposed to some other kinds of experimentations, like field studies, where you basically go to an environment where you try to observe something, or natural experiments, which come about in rather natural situations, again, not impacting the way people behave and work too much. And you actually have a pretty low number of measurements that you can do. We will also see that in our specific running example later on. That's actually one of the major restrictions of human experiments. It's only if you do case studies, for example, where you deal with a lower number of measurements typically. And of course, the number of measurements is very important as soon as you want to apply statistics. So that's a major concern. And you see here in the picture as a difference in technical experiments, it's typically no problem repeating a measurement over and over. So there you typically do not have big data issues. In this table, you also see where to place experimentation with humans. So for example, if I have a how or why question and I want to control behavioral events, then basically I need to do experimentation. As you see, all the other ones in this list, they do not have this kind of control. And we will see that later on as one of the fundamental points of an experiment, that actually we control specific aspects of inferences and then we'll understand how people react to that. And other kinds of techniques like surveys or archive analysis, history analysis, and so on, they typically do not provide this. Also, another characteristic is a focus on contemporary events. That means we do have the events as the experiment unfolds, which is also a precondition so we can control them. But that also means it's not a method with which we can go back in time and try to understand what happened back then under certain circumstances. For that, you have other types of techniques like archive analysis or historical analysis, etc. So with that, let's come again to another exercise. As a context, take the following. Let's assume you would like to better understand how data science methods are used in industrial practice, who uses them, what are the benefits, etc. Would you use controlled experiments with human subjects in such a situation? And data science methods here just stands for anything. You could just insert your other favorite method research if you would like. So take your time, read through the 4 different options, make up your mind on each individual of them, and I would like to mention that in general in this lecture there can also be exercises where more than one of the options can apply. And then take some time and switch on the audio again as soon as you have made up your mind. Okay, welcome back. So let's discuss now each of the 4 options in turn. The first one sounds promising. Yes, I'm very much interested in how humans approach data science methods, therefore I would use controlled experiments. And well, controlled experiments are about humans. And I said one of the differentiating factors is we want to have human subjects and the impacts on humans as a basis. However, in our context statements, there was something else, and that was are used in industrial practice. And an experiment is always, as I stated, kind of an artificial context. So unfortunately, A is not the right answer, as it would not, as it's actually not a good way of understanding how people by themselves use a certain method, as controlled experiments provide such an artificial setting. The second, no, I would use technical experiments as data science methods. significantly rely on technical tools. Well, the no is correct, but the argument is faulty, basically. So technical experiments will also not be a good way of dealing with that. No, I would use a literature survey, as certainly many people have written about it. That's something that you can do or can try to do, but the question is always, is the specific issue already addressed in practice in some literature survey or not? Often it will not be. If I want to have primary data also and I want to have a first-hand understanding of the situation, it is also not a good way to go. So C is unfortunately also not a good answer. So D is a pretty open answer. So again, no. And I would use some other methods like case studies, action research, etc. And indeed, as we will later on see, for example, with case studies, this is a kind of approach that will provide you with a basis of understanding a new setting in industrial practice, to understand, for example, who uses such methods and to observe it. What are the benefits that people perceive that perhaps can be demonstrated, and so on. So D would here be the correct answer.